And so the first thing we have to do, and one of the first things I would do as president, is to say we are imposing fiscal discipline again in this country. And that's why if I'm at the top of the ticket, we won't be losing like we lost in 2018 and 2020 and in 2022. We'll have a Republican House and a Republican Senate. And I will say to Kevin McCarthy, and if it's Mitch McConnell or whoever the leader of the Senate would be at that time, job one is to get spending under control, because the more we spend, the less you can spend. And that's what's horrible for families that make ends meet. And I'll tell you the truth, Donald Trump spent more money than Barack Obama did in a 4-year period, and left us with a bigger deficit, even though he promised that he was going to balance the budget in 4 years. And we left with one of the biggest deficits any president's ever had. And on Ukraine, look, I hope we have a full discussion about Ukraine, but I'll just say this. I think the way we need to look at this is a proxy war with China. The Chinese are supplying the Russians with money by buying their oil. The Chinese are providing drones to the Iranians, and the Iranians are using those drones to kill soldiers in Ukraine. And I think a big and great country, Sarah, should be able to do both. We should be able to get our spending under control, and we should be able to have a strong military that will stand up for friends around the world who are free. Because I will tell you, my real concern about this is, for your children and my grandchildren, are they going to live in a world where China is setting the tone for this world? A communist dictatorship?
That's a pretty interesting answer from Christie. He probably was watching when Ron DeSantis ran, like stepped on a rake when it came to answering questions about that. Ron DeSantis had said, I'm going to cut all the funding or whatever, which is what a lot of Republicans want to hear, but it's not necessarily what a lot of establishment Republicans, particularly elected Republicans and Republican donors, want to hear. They like it, not necessarily for the same reasons that some people might supporting Ukraine, but they do want the funding to be there. Ron DeSantis had to walk it back. So Christie is giving, I think, a smarter, more nuanced answer, but take a look at the strategy that he uses to try to win over Republicans on funding for Ukraine. He does a little bit of the, they're our allies, we want democracy, blah, blah, blah. But the bulk of the argument was, if we don't send the money to Ukraine, China wins. He was playing to that xenophobia against China that became such a big part of Republican politics under Trump. Now, it wasn't just that. He did throw in some anti-Russia stuff, so that's very different than the approach that you'd get from someone like Donald Trump. He threw in stuff about Iran as well. And it's not like there's nothing to what he's saying in terms of the funding or the drones or anything like that. But I don't necessarily love, basing your foreign policy decisions that don't necessarily have to be about xenophobia, even for a Republican, on that, willingly opting into it. Now, if I can separate my own feelings from it, strategically, not necessarily the worst idea. Most of the Republicans in that room probably despise China. I don't think they necessarily understand some of the overlap between the policies linking the government and, elites and all that in some of these countries to largely the way that America is run. But whatever, I'll give him a pass on that. And it would have been very easy for him to have just said, no, we cut the funding, I suppose. That would be more popular amongst Republicans. And it's not like he's going to be asked a lot of foreign policy questions. From what I can remember, it was this, and then there was a question about tariffs against China. That's the bulk of what Republicans want to know in terms of foreign policy. So if you want to win them over, it'd be a very easy thing to just say, we're going to cut that funding. But I guess he's standing on principle, or he's giving his donors what they want. Now, he went on to say, I don't know if it was in that SOT, but he went on to say, or that video, he went on to say that, because it was connected to inflation's out of control, we can't afford all the money that's going there. And so he said, I'm going to cut a bunch of programs. I feel like if he's really trying to win them over, he could talk about, we're going to continue this support for our ally, but that doesn't mean that I think that there should be a blank check, both in terms of overall amount of funding or what form that the funding comes in, particular programs, particular weapons and vehicles and all that. He declined to do that, which I found to be a weird omission. And it makes me wonder if this is a topic that Christie really knows that much about, or is that interested in, or has followed that much. I would, if I were advising him, tell him this is something that you're going to be asked a lot about. Donald Trump is probably going to use your support for continued funding for Ukraine as a wedge against you. And he's already a little bit prepared for that, in that he's going to talk about the Russia-China sort of alliance on all of this. Donald Trump is going to come out of that and looking very awkward. But I do think that you need to nuance your argument a little bit for a Republican audience.